Now, we have a story that ends here in York, but begins with a nun, a bedsheet, a prisoner of war and a remarkable painting. Lucy Hester's been on the trail of the Castleford Madonna.
She stands in the ruins of a city surrounded by desperate people in ragged clothes. But this Madonna has been on an incredible journey. It's a journey that started in a prisoner of war camp in Castleford and ended here in a house in York. Not in an art gallery or museum, it's in here. This massive painting is hanging on Alan Dave Milne's kitchen wall. Hello.
Here it is.
Hello.
Hi, Lucy. Wow. Hi.
So that is, I mean, it's huge, isn't it? How big is that?
I think it's about 8 foot tall and about 5 foot wide.
Because I'm looking at the doors in your house. How on earth did you get it?
Well, with difficulty.
When they bought it in 1997, they didn't know what it was about or who painted it. They had meant to buy a table.
I have a habit of Yorkshire Post on a Saturday. Back page, it has all the auctions in it. I saw this sale of the contents of a convent over in Lancashire. During the course of the auction, there was this painting sort of behind the auctioneer.
There were a lot of people in the auction room. It was very crowded and the top part of it was visible and it looked like a medieval painting. It
was quite dark and it was just odd and it made me feel a little bit uneasy really. Some sort of religious figure in it and other people around her. So I sort of ignored it really. Until
the crowds thinned out and my husband was able to come round to the foreground and see these figures and realise that it was actually a modern painting. And suddenly it was sort of like, oh my God, you know, that's actually a fantastic composition. That's not been painted by someone who's trained at Dulux or something like that. This is a proper painting. So I just popped my hand up, perfect timing, bit over there, that chap, anyone else in? No, it went down, slap, and we'd bought it. And it was just like, yes, that's amazing. I asked the auctioneer, I said, do you know anything about the painting then? It's a very unusual painting. He said, well, we think it was done by a prisoner of war. We didn't know from which country, we didn't know from which war. It was just the rumour it was done by a prisoner of war. That's where the auctioneer knew.
Dave made contact with the nuns who'd sold the painting and astonishingly, one of the sisters who'd worked with prisoners of war in Castleford was still alive and living in London. Sister Petrona is now 96, but still has vivid memories of the war and how she was treated as a German nun living in Britain.
I had a passport, but you know what my status was? Come here, I tell you. Enemy alien. And I was teaching all the time in an English school.
Sister Petrona revealed that the artist was also a German, a prisoner of war called Arthur Brown. She still has one of Arthur's wartime paintings, created, like the Madonna, in a prison camp in Methley. It was the sisters who asked Arthur Brown to create his masterpiece.
One of the big front rooms was a very big room, at least twice as big as this one and wider. And we had that frame of the mirror, was a huge mirror. It wasn't. And we thought, we would like to have a picture in the chapel. And Arthur Brown caught the idea, said yes, a wartime picture would be wonderful.
Now the nuns had a problem. Arthur had accepted the commission for the huge painting, but the materials he needed were in short supply, especially for a German prisoner of war. Luckily, Sister Petrona taught art here at St Joseph's Primary in Castleford. From the school, she brought children's powder paint, and the sisters donated a huge bedsheet for Arthur to use as a canvas. Arthur would have mixed the powder paint with linseed oil, but he needed a studio in the prisoner of war camp. I wanted to find out about the conditions Arthur and the other prisoners lived in. So we asked the Methley archive group to help us out. They appealed for people who remembered the German POWs imprisoned here at Methley. Although he was only a boy, Terry Waite remembers the German prisoners of war.
I can remember, I was only very small, looking down on these prisoners. There'd be probably about 10 of them walking past each morning because they used to go work in the fields. all dressed in their grey coats. And they used to talk to me, and I thought it's strange. I can't understand what these guys are saying to me.
The prisoner of war camp was at Methley Hall, a 16th century stately home used by the army during the war. Terry offered to show me the place where Arthur Brown painted the Madonna.
The house was here. This was the front along here, stretching right back to behind there where the bales are.
The hall was demolished in 1964. All that's left of the prisoner of war camp are the bases of the huts where they lived.
And in fact, this is one of the pads that we stood on now.
Is it really? I mean, the huts are actually quite small, aren't they? Probably fairly cramped. I mean, do you think Arthur would have painted that painting in one of these huts?
Well, it's possible, but I reckon it's going on for 8 feet tall.
Yeah.
So we've wondered if he actually did it in the hall. You know, he was allowed to paint it in the hall.
Arthur Brown now had his materials and a sort of studio. But what was the subject of the painting going to be? For the nuns, he chose a traditional religious composition, the Madonna and Child, but in a wartime setting.
He calls it Our Lady of the Ruins, I think. And you see all the poor people, the cripples, praying to the Mother of God.
But Arthur also wanted to include his own tragic story.
We got a letter from an old POW colleague of his who'd been in America with him, in which he described Arthur Brown's experience of learning that his wife had died in Freiburg. And I suppose for me, it instantly became to look like a painting that was, part of its content was grief. I've always took it that the actual Madonna is an image of his wife, and when we first saw the painting, actually, that was one of the really unusual things about it, in that you have quite a young woman, sort of almost like a next-door neighbour, stood in this biblical scene of devastation.
The painting is called Maria in the Ruins, so, I mean, they represent the damage that war can do. The nuns certainly felt that they were meant to represent the buildings of Freiburg. And this figure here is the artist himself.
When Arthur Brown painted the Madonna in the Ruins, he was a prisoner of war. But here in Methley, the young Germans weren't treated as enemies. Many of them became friendly with the villagers, something they demonstrated very movingly one Christmas Eve here at St Oswald's Church.
I'll be about 16. I was in the congregation. It was full, of course, because it was Christmas Eve. And during the service, they were asked to sing Silent Night in German, which they did. And it really did sound beautiful. And a lot of the prisoners were very upset at the time, I remember. Quite a few broke down and cried, yeah, in tears. Something they don't forget. I can't even tell you who preached that night, but I can remember the prisoners singing the Silent Night.
I think it was fabulous. It brought home to me the agony of the sufferers of war. And at the last instant, at the last thing they could do is to appeal to a supernatural power to stop it.